Hello and welcome to the CFB SuperShow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, joined as always by my friend and co-host Jake Kucheck, the SF Giants guy on Twitter. We are rolling into week 7, messing around with these weekday slates, their craziness, of course. Back to the 12-game main slate. We dealt with a couple of 13 and 14-game slates here recently, but a pretty solid one on deck here on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Pretty excited about how things are going. Week 6 had a mixed bag there. Some pretty solid results for us overall. I think we, obviously would have liked to have done better, but Tawi Walker, who ended up being chalky, got 3 touchdowns. Emeka Egbuka took care of that DVP spot against Iowa. And Ashton Genty took advantage of poor performances. Well, I'd say mediocre by their standards performances for Jalen Milroe and my guy Cam Ward. Is now leading the Heisman race. Dude is an absolute sicko. But overall, like I said, a pretty solid result, I think, in week 6. And as we head into 7, feeling good about our process and where things stand. Jake, some pretty solid results overall. You've been nailing the USC game scripts. How are you feeling about, where we stand over the midway point or close to the midway point of the season, I should say?
Feeling good, man. Got to shout out Damon Claiborne too. He had a pretty big week for us. He was a little bit lower owned than Walker at just came in at like 12% on the big DK, and put up a pretty massive 37 DK points. So I had him, Walker, and I ended up going with like way more Eli Holstein than I had originally anticipated, and that all worked out pretty well. Marion Hampton didn't quite do what I was hoping he would do in the run back of the Holstein lineups. But just the combo of Holstein, Claiborne, and Walker was enough to kind of keep me afloat and end up very positive. Ended up with like a couple top 2% and 3% lineups on the big DK contest last week. So that felt pretty good. Didn't feel as good about Jalen Milroe letting us down. I don't know if a lot of people thought that Vandy were going to win that game. I certainly thought it was going to be a close game, or at least a closer game than the spread indicated. And it's not like the Vandy defense shut anybody down, but we got those 2 kind of quick touchdowns out of the gate from Jam Miller, and it was like, ooh, that's not really the way you want to start out with a lot of Jalen Milroe exposure. So, man, it is what it is. I feel like we both have a pretty good read on things, and pay attention to the tea leaves and pay attention to the usage changes. And I was starting to write my my late slate article and seeing some interesting stuff happen in the Iowa State backfield that we'll get into in that's not on the main slate, that's on the later slate. And also feel like we were early to the game on Sawyer Robertson, and that paid dividends as well. Just some teams and some spots that we feel like we have a pretty good read on by this point. I'm excited.
Yeah, the Holstein call was nice. Desmond Reed, geez, man, this he's just basically a glorified slot receiver now. He was absolutely amazing. He was the play over Hampton, clearly. Sawyer Robertson at 4%. You wrote him up in the night slate. That was great because Georgia Tech, and those secondary slates, they have less coverage, right? And people tend to either have no clue or they follow a groupthink pattern. And Georgia Tech rostership on that slate was like 65%. And we're talking about a 1,200 person GPP single entry, and Haynes King was 65%. And he scored under Sawyer Robertson, which certainly catapulted us to a decent level there. There was a few underwhelming spots, but Sawyer did us right. We're DVP wise and getting some projections together, and we're starting to see some real positive results. So I'm feeling great about that. All right, we're going to dive into the slate here. 12 gamer. We're going to talk primarily about DraftKings. I'll mention a couple of FanDuel spots I see, but mostly save that for Saturday morning during the Q&A session. We'll also have some PrizePicks, Underdogs, betting opportunity slots, slate breakers, touchdown calls, and then we'll get out of here ready to just absolutely nuke week 7, one more 3-game slate to tilt tomorrow. Today was the day of touchdowns being scored by 1% owned players. It was pretty wild. Anyhow, let's get into it. Alabama versus South Carolina. 21-point favorites are Bama. 50-point spread. And something that I really should have probably seen a little bit more. And you called it, saying, we both like Vanderbilt. They've been playing pretty well. The hangover factor there for Bama. It was something that I had mentioned, like, I'm worried about this. They took care of business against Georgia. Will they have that dreaded, hangover type of performance? But the Heisman candidacy is real. It was a very, murky situation there. And obviously Vanderbilt took advantage. So this week, Alabama, it's a tough matchup for them, but man, they're going to be playing piss. Can't possibly imagine them losing a second game in a row. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, man. So obviously, this is new territory for Alabama, right? Like, I think that's probably one of the worst losses in the history of Alabama, given the context, and probably one of the best wins for Vandy. And so, if anybody says, "Oh, I've seen this before from Bama, and I know what's going to happen," I don't think that's true, because this is pretty wild. That said, I think that they roll pretty hard in this one. South Carolina can't pass the football; they just can't. Whatever they're doing back there with Sellers and Ashford, and I think they're going to go with Sellers, but maybe it could be Ashford, or maybe it'll be Sellers for a little bit and he'll get hurt and then Ashford will come in. It doesn't matter. Bama defense is built to stop a team like this. And yes, Diego Pavia does do some of those same things, but he also can throw the ball downfield in addition to the things that he can do in the mobile version of his quarterbacking. And so I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of 3-and-outs for South Carolina, a lot of punts. And I think that we'll probably have a Bama offense that starts a little bit slow. And as the game wears on, they're, them being on the field for longer, the South Carolina defense being on the field for too long is just going to wear them down. I don't know that this is a spot where I want to pay 10-8 for Jalen Milroe, just because we're going to need some savings on this slate, and I do think that he puts up reasonable numbers. I think that 303, 304, maybe at 250 and 100 yards rushing with 3 to 4 total touchdowns, like that is very reasonable. That's a pretty good day. But we need like 505 at 10-8. Like he had an underwhelming game by all measures, particularly from a DFS measure, because he didn't get those massive 70-yard rushing touchdowns like we're accustomed to seeing him do. And his price went up, and he's got a tougher opponent. Like all those things together, I don't really want to get to Jalen Milroe. Does he have it in him? Does he have the talent to put up like a 60-point game? Sure. Do they need it this week? Probably not. And so that's it. Like, this is a pissed off Bama team that could come out and have him just go absolutely bonkers. It is within the realm of expectation, but I'm not falling all over myself to roster him the way that I was last week. I don't really understand the running back usage, other than the fact that they basically made Jalen Milroe the running back, and Justice Haynes and Jam Miller are competing for like that 1B spot. But neither of them are getting double-digit carries. They're not priced in the 4s like the Iowa State guys are on the later slate. They're 5.5 and 6.2. I can't really get there either. The one spot, no surprise to anyone, I'm pretty excited about is Ryan Williams, who was the one guy who didn't let us down from the Alabama team last week. Yes, he only had 3 catches, but he made the most of them, 382 and a touchdown. The dude is averaging 28 yards a catch on the season. It's just bonkers. And every week he makes a play that like human bodies shouldn't be able to make. And he got a goal line carry towards the end when they really needed it. So he is going to be one of those guys, I think, that price no longer matters for the rest of the season. You could get him up around 9K, and if he fits the build, I'm still using him. I am no longer concerned about what Ryan Williams' price is. That said, his price only went up by $100 from last week, and he seems to be a pretty steady 20 to 25 points, even if he doesn't have a bonkers kind of day. He'll find a way to get there, but every day is a bonkers day when it's Ryan Williams' world. So can definitely use him. Him and Milroe is less of a priority than it was last week when it was like my highest priority. Certainly in play, but not something I'm going to need to do. So really Williams is the focus. And then I don't really have anything I want to do on the South Carolina side. I understand Rocket Sanders is, as cheap as we'll see a Rocket Sanders, but he's getting no kind of volume. They are going to be awful game script for him. I don't see him being extremely efficient, even in what little touches he is given. And other than that, I have no interest in the South Carolina side.
Yeah, unfortunately, Rockets, in the committee now. Maybe it was just because he was coming back from being banged up. They've got Attaway and McDowell, but yeah, he seems to be stuck in the committee. And it was already hard enough. As somebody who really does the whole 4 running back thing and does the whole gimmick, but and has a lot of success with that build, it was really hard for me last week to play Jalen Milroe at 10-4, but it was the right thing to do. He was under 20%. Had he even had 30, that would have been fine. But yeah, now that he's at 10-8, almost 11K, I have to draw the line. I was even struggling back when we had Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts putting up these ridiculous numbers, and you had to really, decide if you were going to fade them. I was fading them all the time, honestly. So with Milroe right now, I'm taking it a little bit easy on him, and I miss the days already. They seem so long ago for Ryan Williams being 3K, 4 or 5 when we were the only ones on him. But yeah, Bama side should absolutely roll here. All right, moving on to the next game, Clemson versus Wake Forest, a total just over 61, and Clemson 20-point favorites. Now, last week against FSU, we bet them at 14.5 to 15-point favorites. They took care of business. It got a little bit close there, but overall, Clemson is just rolling. And now they get a Wake Forest team that is a pretty putrid defense overall. They're giving up almost 300 yards per game through the air and about 170 on the ground. So there should be enough fantasy goodness here for a Clemson mini stack if you want it. I haven't really been doing that much this year, but every week I feel like it's the team where it's like, man, I probably should have had a little bit more Clemson, and at least now I've started betting them, so I'm benefiting that way. But we really have to take a look at them. And I know Cade Klubnik is a little bit difficult to sit here and ever really consider him, especially when he's priced at 9K, but this is a matchup where we could do so. 23 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. He's thrown for over 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions. So he's really playing mistake-free football. And I feel like Dabo, all the smack talk he does, Coach Dabo Sweeney, and all the trolling he gets from the masses, they're using this season as kind of like a revenge tour of sorts. Like they're going to have a really good chance to get into the playoff with the expanded field. Everybody kind of doubting them, and right now they're just rolling through teams. And granted, a lot of them are bad teams, but they're beating them up. And I wouldn't be surprised if they ran the score up here against Wake Forest. They're going to be fully capable of doing so. So Klubnik is fine at 9K. Certainly not a priority, but if you're an MME and running some multiple lineups, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't have a Clemson stack somewhere. At running back, it's still all about Phil Maffa. His production's taken a hit somewhat because of this passing explosion that they're enduring. He did have 154 yards last game on 25 carries, so that was good to see that they actually made a point to get him back involved and feeling confident. In that big Stanford blowout, he only had the 10 carries. NC State was a blowout, just had the 7 carries. So he's been a victim of a bit of some of the blowouts, and that game was relatively closer than I think a lot of people thought it would be against FSU. So he was able to run the football a lot more. Blowout definitely a factor here, but I think there'll be some efficiency, and he's kind of in that weird in-between point at 6'5", where you could definitely get there, but I think he might fall through the cracks just a little bit. At wide receiver, I think the obvious one that people would look to for Klubnik stacks or on his own would be Antonio Williams, who's been just an absolute touchdown machine this season. Has 4 touchdowns so far, a multi-touchdown game to his belt, and just very consistent. I like Bryant Wesco the most, though, the freshman. There is a bit of variance there, and his price is no longer mega cheap. He was down below, 4.2 in that range. Now he's up to 4.7. And that's just a product from all the work that he's getting. 13 targets in the past 2 games alone. Williams is still operating, I think, as the WR1, but he's kind of more of a 1A. And now we're seeing Wesco emerge as the 1B. Deep threat for sure. Had 7 targets in the last game? They didn't generate a lot of offense there, but they were looking his way a lot. And then TJ Moore, the other freshman, big play threat. And then you have Jake Brindstole, the showdown special, we always say, Mr. Reliable, 4+ targets in 4 of his last 5 games. So you have various stacking options that you can utilize here. And Tyler Brown is still dealing with issues. He came back against Stanford, but the ankle flare up, which was a new injury there, it's still very doubtful for him to play in this one. I don't think they need to rush him back. They can allow him to kind of get healthy. They just have this kind of, plethora of young receivers that can do well. And even Troy Stiletto, just want to call him Tony all the time. Troy Stiletto was even somewhat active last game and even got a carry or 2. So they've got plenty of depth there. They don't need to rush Brown back. If you are playing Klubnik, I would highly recommend playing him with the receiver. That's kind of a given. You can run Bryant Wesco on his own if you want. They're probably more of a GPP flavor than a main team option, but he's definitely my guy, and I'm going to be talking about him a lot over the next couple of seasons. On Wake Forest, you have a very cheap Hank Bachmeier at 5'9", and the matchup against Clemson's actually not horrible. He can work out at this price. He's got heavy passing volume. He's thrown 28+ passing attempts in every single game, which includes a pretty stiff test against Virginia. That was a fun game back in week 2 where he attempted 42 passes. Still kind of a cap at upside wise, like 20 to 25 fantasy points. But at 5'9", if he returns, that type of score at 25, you're definitely feeling pretty good about it. It does certainly help that they have an absolute stud. Nice call by you last week on Claiborne. They ended up in a close battle with NC State. They needed to slow things down a little bit because NC State was starting to make things happen, and they were able to run the ball with Claiborne really effectively. He was banged up a little bit, but 20 carries for 136 yards, the 2 touchdowns, still active in the passing game. 5.7 is a really nice price for him, and Clemson's honestly not that great of a defense when it comes to the running game. If there's a weak point to this Clemson defense, it's certainly the running game there, and we've seen some success by pass back. So I don't mind going back to Claiborne there if you want to. I think a lot of people will be hesitant to do so just because the idea that Clemson blows their opponents out. They're such a good defense. I mean, people are going to be really hesitant to do so, but I think you can get him at sub 10% this week and certainly get a return there, especially with his pass catching ability. At receiver, Donovan Green's doubtful once again, not even on the week 7 depth chart, so I wouldn't imagine we'd see him. All of their pass catchers are sub 5K. Usual cast of characters, Taylor Morin, kind of the main option there. Horatio Fields, maybe more of the explosive, and then Deuce Alexander, who has been kind of emerging in recent weeks. Positive game script for all of them. Not necessary to stack Hank Bachmeier up if you do go that route, but if you're, I assume you're not going to be using him in your main lineup for GPP wise. If you are going to go there, probably makes sense to use one of them. I would look to Deuce Alexander this week. I was more on the Morin side. I didn't have a ton of exposure there, but Morin was the one that I did like for underdog purposes. Didn't really work out. He's kind of the more reliable option, but I think Fields and Alexander have more of the game-breaking upside there. But overall, you can run Maffa, Clemson stacks galore. I'm going to be probably betting this one. Clemson minus 20 seems like it's a little stiff, but I might look at some alt lines there and the over 61.5, which might skirt some people and make you feel like that total is a little high. But we're running really well on totals the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to heat check ourselves here by taking the over 61.5 on that game. Anything you'd like to add to that before we move on?
Over 61.5, man. I like it. Clemson, they can score quickly, and Wake can give up points quickly. So that's a good pairing for an over. I like it.
Absolutely. All right, moving on, we're going to be talking about a very fun game, Georgia Tech versus Carolina, total of 60. Georgia Tech 4-point favorites on the road. Again, last week on the night slate, Georgia Tech, their receivers and Haynes King were super chalky, and this is a game that we know should have lots of points. People typically look at the total, so I'm expecting ownership on this one as well. Which way can we go with this one, and how many pieces should we be having?
Yeah. Well, I hope that everybody that was, quasi burned by Georgia Tech on the night slate doesn't trust them or doesn't want to go back to the well here. Because, man, what a good spot North Carolina is for anybody facing them. We saw that, obviously with Pitt last week. And, the maybe not super logical combo of quarterback and running back worked out in a huge way. Like if you had that Holstein and Reed, it's an extremely expensive stack. It was an extremely expensive stack to do. And we have an opportunity to do that exact same thing, and we're doing it less expensively. So I guess where I'm going with that is a lot of people are going to be tempted to do we obviously are going to play Haynes King, right? And so if we play Haynes King, we've got to play him with one of Rutherford and Singleton or both. And what I'm saying is, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to go Haynes King, Jamal Haynes as the stack. We're gonna trust that Georgia Tech has the wherewithal to look at what was successful for Pitt, do a lot of the out of the backfield stuff, and Jamal Haynes, by the way, can get it done on his own. Like he doesn't need that Desmond Reed 10 catches for 150 yards game to do some things. He's got plenty of wheels and can break loose against this Tar Heel defense on his own. 19-1, 28-7 last week, caught 3 passes as well in what was a down game for the team overall, only scoring 24 points, but he put up 26 fantasy points for doing so, and he's only 6K. If you had Desmond Reed at 6K, and this is the exact same spot, he would be 97% owned, right? And so Jamal Haynes, a little bit different skill set. Not saying he's Desiree, but he's 85% of Des Reed at 60% of the price or 65% of the price, whatever it is. I think this is a great spot to utilize both of those guys, and that's not to say that you can't also use one of the receivers. Because I think everybody's going to be getting some points in this one. So if you wanted to do the complete stack them up, the King and Haynes and one of Rutherford or Singleton, I'm not going to stop you at all from doing that. Where I get a little bit nervous is picking a run back. So the Georgia Tech side is obvious. King, yes. Haynes, yes. Singleton or Rutherford, yes. Maybe you have a shout as a third receiver that you want to throw in the mix. Maybe you think Avery Boyd is going to take some deep shots, or Chase Lane gets into the mix to a higher degree than he has been. But really, it's Singleton and Rutherford. Where it gets dicey is the run back, right? Because the one thing we know about Tech is that they can stop the run, and maybe at all costs will be attempting to stop the run. And that does not play well for a 9K Omarion Hampton or 8,900 Omarion Hampton. We know that Hampton will get his. We know that the volume will be there. And if, he bucks the trend at 8.9K and is extremely efficient in his 24 to 27 touches that he'll probably get. If he gets 103, well, great. We've done well there. If he gets, 23 for 75 and 1, that's fallen a little bit short, especially if he doesn't get a ton of passing work too. So I do think it's a little bit of a risk to use Hampton as the run back. Even though I think that will be a very popular move, I'm not as into that. The receivers are pretty interesting too, because what did we say going into last week when we were talking about the pick game and wanting a run back from the pick game? Oh, it looks like J.J. Jones is the man for North Carolina, and if it's not him, maybe it's Nesbitt. He's seeing all the red zone work and getting into the end zone. And then Nate McCollum catches 10 balls for some odd reason, and we're like, well, hold on a minute. What's going on there? So this is a spot, Walt, that I don't have a good read on in terms of this North Carolina pass catcher group. And if you are saying today's Kobe Pacer week and Kobe Pacer is going to go for 10, 150 and 2, more power to you, but I can't figure it out. So I'm very confident in the Georgia Tech side. I understand the correlation and wanting to have a run back, especially if you are very much interested in the Georgia Tech side. I would caution you if you are doing, one lineup or if you're doing minimal lineups, that I have very little confidence in any particular North Carolina pass catcher and a lot of confidence that one of them will do extremely well. So if you want to play one lineup, I would say just take the Georgia Tech guys and move on to other parts of your lineup. If you're doing the MME thing, or you're doing the 20 max, something like that, I would run it back with every single dude in that North Carolina pass catcher room, because somebody's going to do well. We might have multiple guys do well, in which case, multiple of your lineups will do well. But hitting on that North Carolina run back is going to be absolutely critical. And the one guy I don't think it's going to be is the most expensive guy, which is Omarion Hampton. So very interesting game from the perspective of the logic in me wants to stack it up entirely with a bunch of run backs, but I don't really know how to get there. And then with Jacoby Criswell, man, it's hard for me to want to use one of my valuable quarterback or super flex spots on a guy who I think has a ceiling of about 25 in this spot. I want to have 30-point upside, hopefully 35-point upside from that spot, regardless of price. And I don't see him being efficient enough and getting touchdowns without getting the requisite turnovers to get us to that 35-point number. So tell me you have the run back on the North Carolina side, man. I'm praying.
So Criswell hasn't shown his rushing upside yet. He will eventually, but I don't know that this is gonna be the week. There will be one where he pops off, but Grant, you're right on point there. It's gonna be hard to trust him yet. I don't believe I kind of. It's funny because I don't know if I said it on the show, but I think I've said it privately talking to somebody in DMs that Nate McCollum was effectively dead. Going through my battle royale lineups on Underdog, and I said, "Oh, we don't need any Nate McCollum, that's for sure." And then, he busts out and did that. Last year, he kind of looked like the number one guy, right? So it was kind of the expectation going into the season. So that type of performance, had he done that at the beginning of the year, I don't think we would have been shocked. I still think J.J. Jones is kind of like the guy, but he's not like overwhelmingly the guy. If you're going to use a run back, I think the only thing you can really trust outside of Hampton's touches, which I think he's going to do fine, but like you mentioned, his price is probably taking him out of play, is either Bryson Nesbitt, who did have 8 targets last week. Still, second on the team in targets with 8, 4 catches, 34 yards. I know the stat line didn't look great at the end of the day, but the targets were there. And John Koppenheimer, the tight end 2, had caught all 4 of his targets for similar yardage, except he caught the touchdown. And that very easily could have been Nesbitt last week, and we'd be probably talking a little bit differently. Both of them are priced very, very low, 3.5 and 3.4. I think Criswell is going to continue to pepper those guys. They're far from needing to plug them into your lineup by any means, but you mentioned we may have to find some value here for some of these top-end guys. I like the idea of Nesbitt. He's going to be relatively low-owned, and people are going to look at Koppenheimer and say, oh, he scored a touchdown. He's the guy now, short-sighted. But I'm looking at those 8 targets, and I think Nesbitt is your best bet there for at least not getting a bagel.
Yeah, Nesbitt is kind of the direction I was leaning to in terms of
Yeah.
people are maybe off of him because he didn't get the touchdown variance, but I think he might get it back, right? Kind of thing. Really, what we need. You remember that week that like Tez Walker was suspended, and then all of a sudden he could play again, and he was like 3K. We needed that this week. Like that would be the plug-in that, you know, at the last second, Tez Walker can play for 3K and go for like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's who I want on North Carolina.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, the Nesbitt calls, it's very uninspiring because he's not going to put up like a 30, right? It's going to be like a 4 catch, maybe a touchdown. So we don't have a Tez Walker there. I wish we did, but yeah, totally in agreement there. Georgia Tech, love them this week. All right, moving on, we have the Washington Huskies traveling to Iowa this week and playing early for their body clocks, if you will, 9 a.m. That's going to be brutality for Washington. They're 2.5-point dogs against Iowa, the total of 41.5. I'd like to sit here and I wore my hoodie. I'd like to say that they're going to win this game, but I don't have any real confidence in them doing that. So I won't be a homer on this one. I'll be, objective. But we did unearth a really sneaky DVP spot heading into last week, during that Ohio State game. Really talked about, hey, Iowa's been getting burned by guys out of the slot most of the time. It's the slot receiver, but we're also seeing guys who maybe excel in intermediate routes really doing some destruction and devastation to this team. And the name that I kept coming back to was Emeka Egbuka, who I did get in some lineups and then all my afternoon lineups. And he had a 9.71-3 game. Really nice performance by him. So that's a DVP spot I think that we can look at because Iowa's rush defense is elite. I don't know that Jonah Coleman, who does get volume, is going to find much room here against Iowa. And we saw last week, both Judkins and Henderson were held in check, and that's exactly what we thought would happen. This week's a little bit tricky because the Huskies run Giles Jackson out of the slot, but he's more of that type of slot receiver who thrives on big plays, which isn't how you're going to beat Iowa on the big plays. More with Denzel Boston, who thrives in that intermediate route role. So Boston's about 7.7, almost 8K. It's going to be really difficult to get there, but man, he's been so good. 8 touchdowns. Early at the season last year, I had mentioned like, hey, we're not going to be able to use this guy, but I'm really excited about Denzel Boston being the next Rome Odunze, and he's well on track to being that. I think he does score again here, but the price point, it's going to be tough. I think it's like one of those games where he catches 5 balls, but maybe his yardage total is below 60 and he has a touchdown. So not quite getting there to what we need. Jackson at only 5.7 is really interesting. I just don't see him as the Egbuka type to be able to take advantage of that matchup. Egbuka's kind of like a strong, physical guy. We saw that out of Jalen Noel for Iowa State. He really kind of bashed them around. But theoretically, Jackson is the one in the DVP spot that should do well here. Only 2 touchdowns on the year, very cheap at 5.7, but I do not have the confidence level that I did in Egbuka. And this is going to be a DVP spot that I look at every single week and highlight the slot guy for you guys. But I think that this one is going to be a little bit tougher for us to take advantage of. Now, Saturday morning, I might be more gung-ho and playing Jackson in my main lineup. But as of now, I'm approaching it with caution. I do want to play Caleb Johnson. We were very early on Caleb, getting him at a super cheap price, even after he just detonated his first couple of games after he was suspended for that first half way early in week 1. We got him on the night slate at like 5%. And it was like, people are just not learning about Caleb Johnson. This week, I expect him to see more ownership. If Underdog's any indication, he's been being drafted in the first round, in the second round a lot. The Huskies are an elite tier secondary. They are very, very good against the pass. They have multiple future NFL pros in their secondary, which is pretty common every year for them. And Iowa's passing offense isn't going to do much of anything against them. They don't do much against anyone, even Troy, let alone the Huskies. So they're going to have to run the football a lot. And you might think, well, the Huskies can just stack up and try to slow Caleb that way. Ohio State did a really nice job of that last week, but he started to hurt them a little bit. It was too late, and Iowa doesn't have the offense to keep up. But you saw in the second half, Caleb Johnson started breaking runs. He scored a touchdown. He had about 86, 90 yards there when it was all said and done, but he just kept bashing into that defense, and I think they were getting tired of it, honestly. So I think we're going to see him do a significant amount of damage against the Huskies. We saw last week, I thought Millings might be the one to do that because we saw Montague the week before. It was actually the revival week for multiple players, but Donovan Edwards woke up and he had a really nice game against the Huskies, burned them for a big touchdown run. So I'm feeling pretty confident in Caleb here. The price is spendy, so I wonder if that'll be another week where we can get him at a sub 10% ownership mark, which is very possible. And I'm fine with that. It's obviously way more expensive than the 4-2 price that I had him at a couple weeks back against Iowa State, but I absolutely love this kid. He's so good, and I'm very worried about how the Huskies are going to try to defend him. You can pretty much assume that he's going to get a minimum of 20 touches. He's also a factor in the passing game. Now, their passing game is 2 to 3 yard, catches for him. But if he gets enough of those, then you have that positive floor as well. The price point, and we need to get 30. I think we do hit 30 because he's probably going to score 3 touchdowns. And the game that Monagai had against us was just a volume pounding the rock type of game. You can expect that for Caleb as well. So you can play him. And then we can track the DVP spot for Giles Jackson, but I'm not quite there yet with him as a main team look. All right. I'm not going to go into I don't want to offend you, so I'm going to ask you, but usually your answer on Iowa games is the same every week. Do you have any opinion of this one, or should we move on?
I don't know, man. Caleb Johnson against your Huskies, and you're still
a believer now?
Look, it's gonna be dependent on roster construction because the price tag is pretty high. But look, if he can pound against Ohio State and eventually break them down, I think he's got a pretty decent shot at doing that this week too. So
Absolutely. And he could be the Desmond Reed play perhaps where, the masses just didn't play him because he was expensive in the game environment. But yeah, it's just way too positive a spot for him. All right, moving on to the next game here, Wisconsin versus Rutgers. Scarlet Knights are 2-point favorites currently and a total of 43.5. You look at this one, looks physical. Fantasy favorite last week, Tawi Walker back in the mix. Monagai is a stud running back as well. This game just looks like it's going to be one of those really low scoring physical games. Who can we get out of this one? What do you see happening?
So first take on it, is Braden Locke actually kind of good? Like, do we not that we're using him against Rutgers? I'm not going to be that crazy, but did he look kind of good? Like he can throw a good deep ball, and yes, it's Purdue, and you take that with like a million grains of salt, but he looks kind of good and comfortable.
That was the best game from Wisconsin I've seen in 2 years. Yes, it was against Purdue, but still, that was a huge game. Easily the best in 2 years.
I think they might have found something there, and the offense just seems to flow. And like guys with crazy names I've never heard are catching 60-yard touchdowns, and like I think like Wisconsin might have something in Braden Locke. But yes, Walker is obviously the man. And if there is, a DFS play from this game, and I'm not convinced that there is, but if there is one, it's probably Walker. I understand they're going on the road and facing a tough physical Rutgers defense, but they're a tough physical Wisconsin offense. And I think they're going to want to protect Locke a little bit. I don't think he's going to air it out a ton. At least that's not going to be the focus of the game plan, which means a lot of Walker, who had an amazing first half and was just completely shut down because they were up by so much. And like had that been a competitive game, or had he played the whole game, he was going to end up with 50 DraftKings points. Like he was just on such a roll, and he was such an integral part of their offense, especially when they got down near the goal line, that I mean, he was. It would have been disgusting how many points he was going to score. So, and they didn't raise his price. He's only 5'3", and so I think we're going to have to go back to the well with Walker, with the understanding that we're not going to get the same efficiency out of him in the first half that we did against Purdue, because it's just not the same thing. But that's still too cheap of a price point to avoid him entirely. We're not going to play Braden Locke. Like, we're just not, but we want to keep him in the back pocket for like an Indiana game or something where he's got a defense that is suspect in an offense that can put up enough points to match. I think there's going to be a slate where he's like 5-7 and everyone's like, yeah, but it's Wisconsin. They just run all the time and Braden Locke's going to throw for like 405. It's not going to be this week, but it'll happen in the future. Will Pong's a little banged up. Don't know that I was going to be super into him anyway. He hasn't necessarily shown much consistency, at least to the degree that we expect from him. You're going to probably have to help me with pronunciation here, but is it Trech Kekahuna?
Kekahuna is what I've been saying, but I don't have a confirmation on that.
Exploded in garbage time for 134 and 2. I don't know how you do that and don't get some additional run. I think like I guess chemistry that they're displaying, and maybe playing Purdue was the chemistry. But they seem to have some good there and something good going on there. And then the more realistic play, Vinny Anthony.
That's the one
for down at 3,300. We always get that question in the Discord, like 20 minutes before kick. Who's the guy who's under 3,400 that's going to explode for 160 and 2 touchdowns? Well, Vinny Anthony might not do that, but he has scored a long touchdown in both of the games with Braden Locke, both against SC and against Purdue. So seems to be some interest in getting the ball down the field to Vinny Anthony. And if you need somebody to jam into the lineup to make everything else fit, you could do a lot worse for 3,300. On the Rutgers side, Eitan Kaliakmanis, we're probably going to just skip right over him. Game manager type, still needs a nickname, doesn't have one. Rutgers is a team that runs the football. They are mainly going to do that with Monangai, as we know. Between Monangai at 7.6 and Walker at 5.3, it's really hard for me to get to Monangai at 7.6. That said, because I'm thinking about it that way, Monangai very much could easily go for 203, and I could be eating these words. He has that within him, and they're playing at home. They play tough. They're a physical team. It is within the realm of possibility, much like with Omari and Hampton, that he has a volume-based, amazing game, but the price is a little bit more than I want to get to. And if we are skipping over the passing game from the quarterback perspective, we're also going to be skipping over it from the receiver perspective. Typically, we would give passing mention to Dymere Miller, but he has not been doing anything. Had some tough matchups. He started the year a little bit better than he's been against Big Ten competition, but I don't think we can get to Dymere Miller in this one. I think if you want a punt receiver, it's on the Wisconsin side, not on the Rutgers side.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I've seen, it's not official, like it hasn't caught on, but I've seen some of the media try to call Athen the Greek rifle. So I don't know if that sticks, but that's
I've seen that floating around too. I don't know if anybody's talking about him enough to give him a nickname. It's all no guy.
True. All right, moving on. We have Texas versus Oklahoma. 14-point favorites are Texas on the road and a 49 total. To me, this seems like the Clemson spot last week. Like it's a road game, yes, but they're so much better than the team they're playing. I know it's a rivalry. Theoretically, Oklahoma should be able to keep this close, but I feel like Texas is just like so much better that they should win this by 3 scores or more. Now they are going to go with Quinn Ewers, who has been out for the past couple of weeks, and they've done just fine with Arch. So there's a little bit of maybe a reacclimation period. Obviously, he knows this offense well, and he's got that chemistry, but sometimes missing a few games can throw that timing off a little bit. He's priced at nearly 10K. That seems like a rather easy fade. Now, I say that knowing that he could, theoretically throw up a 40 and be like, I said to fade him, but it's just really hard to get, strategy wise, pay that price for him coming off of the injury. this game, it seems like it would behoove them to really kind of focus on the run game. And they've got this committee that they're very, beholden to, with Jaden Blue, Quinn Wisner, and Jarrett Gibson. It seems very much so that they're committed to running all three of those guys. And we're not going to get a bell cow, and that keeps them fresh. It wears the defense down, and you can protect yours a little bit. God forbid you don't want to get him hurt again in a game that I really think isn't going to be all that competitive. And when I look at it, I don't have that much interest in the Texas backs either, even though they're all cheap. We've seen Jaden Blue be pretty chalky on a few slates here. He's one of those guys who has been really good when he's not on a slate or very low owned. And when he is chalky, he bricks hard. And I know that technically doesn't matter, but it is one of those funny quirks that we've seen several times throughout the years of guys who just don't perform as chalk. So I don't think he'll be chalk here. He's priced at 7.5. That's a little stiff there, considering the fact that he's probably not getting 20 plus carries even in a competitive game because Gibson and Wisner exist. As far as the receivers go, Isaiah Bond has emerged as the top guy, 20 catches on 26 targets, 364 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Don't think it's necessary. He's priced at 5.9. I am looking to get possibly 2 cheap receivers this week with the running backs that I want. Bond's been really good. 3 out of his 5 games over double-digit fantasy points, so I definitely get it. And then you have a bunch of secondary weapons here. Matthew Golden with his 22 targets, very cheap. Ryan Wingo, we saw at the beginning of the season really do well. He's kind of fallen off a little bit now, hit a bit of a freshman wall. And then we saw DeAndre Moore last week, 4 catches, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns kind of pop. Don't know that that's going to be something we can obviously can expect on a week-to-week basis, but his name's in the hat there as a secondary option. I still really like Jonte Cook. I don't think we've seen the ascension on Cook that I thought we were going to see. He's shown flashes, but he hasn't put it all together like he did in that week 3 game. I think we see him, start to emerge again here with Ewers. I think he's better suited with Ewers. So I do like him at 3.8 as a GPP guy. And then you have the tight end Gunnar Helm, who's just a consistent option for everyone. Ewers, we had the success over the last couple of years with our guy, Jaquan Sanders, just that safety valve at tight end. So Helm makes sense there, but none of them are particularly exciting options for me this week. But you can get value there if you want exposure to this Texas game without breaking the bank. You can do so under Bond. Golden, probably your safest bet there at 4.4. I'd much rather like him at that 3.8 range that Cook's at, but I think more so GPP looks here than anything. And Texas defense is for real. Every year we go into it, Texas and USC, their defenses are improved. They're going to be so elite. Watch out. Every year, both of them usually fall on their face. But now that we're into week 7, pretty much to the midway point, I'd say, Texas has not fallen on their face. USC predictably defensively has. So I don't think we need to be targeting against this Texas defense, especially not with Oklahoma, a team that, Hawkins, we've mentioned he has some upside. He looked pretty good against Auburn. He has that dual threat upside, but I feel like Texas is going to stuff him in a locker. The running game, between Joe Barnes, who they continue to make a thing, Gavin Sawcheck's on a milk carton. There's really nothing we can look to there. And their receiving room is decimated with injuries. Deion Burks has already been ruled out. Without him, it makes things really difficult. They don't have to worry about getting beat deep too much by anyone. No real consistent weapons. Brennan Thompson's probably the best guy there to look at. There was a week or two ago where Jaquez Petaway as a cheapie got some steam as a kind of chalkier value at 3.3. Now he's priced at 4.2. He had 1 reception for 2 yards. I don't think so. Not going there. Bauer Sharp, we had some success with early in the season. I think it was week 1 against Temple. He's pretty consistent, 3 or 4 catches at 3.4. Yeah, I guess that's okay. But for the most part, I think this is a game that I'm going to be avoiding, but betting heavily on the Texas side. I think they just surgically decimate Oklahoma, but nobody has a real gotta have it DFS score. So that's how I see that one going. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, man, it's too bad that there are so many injuries on the Oklahoma side, because this is one of my favorite games of the year where I don't have a dog in the fight, and you're absolutely right. I think Texas rolls, and this one is just variance of who gets all the long touchdowns, but there's not going to be a lot of back and forth action in this one, unfortunately.
For sure. All right, moving on, we have an ACC battle. Still weird to say that, but Pitt versus Cal. Total of 58, with Pitt being a 3.5-point favorite. Now, this is one of those spots where a West Coast team going to the East Coast, they have a little bit of reprieve. They're playing later in the day, but Cal, man, just seems like an emotionally drained spot after getting that win against Miami, ripped away from them, perhaps somewhat unfairly against Miami. I'm happy because I have a lot of Miami futures, but I got to admit, they might have got robbed in that one. Pittsburgh, fantasy darlings, we love them. Expect some chalkier options here. What do you think?
Pitt is only a 3-point favorite. That seems light. Cal coming off of that loss, and like, I don't know, Vegas knows what they're doing. I'm not saying we're smarter than them by any means, but I don't know. I feel like Tony Romo here. I think Pitt wins this by 2 touchdowns, right? Like, they have an extremely explosive offense against the team that lost like the most emotional loss that you could possibly lose. Have game day at your West Coast school against a Miami team and play amazing for 3 quarters and then just let it all fall apart. Still have a chance at the end and can't get it done. Like, I don't know how you come back from that. To make matters worse, there's like a little bit of a quarterback controversy thing. Like, Mendoza is the man, but then Chandler Rogers came in and like did some awesome stuff every time he came in. And so then they're kind of like, well, maybe we get more Chandler Rogers involved. And does that mess with Mendoza's confidence all week after having lost the game the way that they did? It's a rough spot for Cal. And yes, as you mentioned, flying east after the game that ended at like 2 a.m. East Coast time, on late on a Saturday night. That's a tough week. Eli Holstein. Is there anybody that plays differently than they look and their name sounds more than Eli Holstein? Like, Eli Holstein should be doing your taxes or like filing a lawsuit for you, not running for 70 yards and a touchdown against, any ACC defense. But the dude can play. Like, the dude can absolutely play. I don't know how he does it. He looks weird doing it, but he can absolutely play.
Pocket passer at SMU is what I think of when I think of Eli Holstein, like Shane Buechele part 2, but this is not the case.
Yeah, he's not doing that. It's like, I'm sure there's a college basketball guy where you look at the guy and you're like, there's no way he's athletic, and then he just does stuff. Right. But that's how I feel about him. And massive price, 9.7. Like, he's up there in Ewers, Manning, Jalen Milroe territory. More expensive than Cade Klubnik. You better get a lot out of him, but you're going to get a lot out of him one way or another. He gets involved in the offense. And Pitt is just a weird team, man. I mean, their best running back is a quarterback, and their best receiver is a running back. And it's a weird spot, but they're all expensive. You're not getting a discount on anybody that you would use. So it's kind of just a function of, can you find the salary for Holstein and Reed? They are great plays if you can find the salary, and also if you can think that Cal keeps up after what happened to him last week. We've seen Cal score points, but can they pull off after a letdown and keep up with Pitt enough for you to be able to afford the Holsteins and Reeds of the world? That's the real decision point. If you're using Holstein, throwing a Mumpfield in, throwing a Poppy Williams in, even Sensei Lee got back in on the act to a degree, catching a touchdown last week. We haven't seen much from Gavin Bartholomew since week 1. Elijah Arroyo did okay against Cal. Maybe we see some Gavin Bartholomew show up. But really, it's just focused around Holstein and Reed and if you can afford them or not. So that's hard for me to answer for anyone. They're at such high price points that they're not jam it in guys, and I think because of the way that I feel this game will go, and that it'll get out of hand, probably pretty early second quarter. We could be looking at like a a 28-7 type of game. I think that, we take the foot off the gas a little bit, and instead of getting, 30-yard touchdowns from Reed, we get chunk plays from, I don't know, maybe Hammond comes back in. Maybe we see some Derek Davis. We don't see the kind of volume that these prices warrant from the pit guys, because I think that they take care of business early in this one. So love the thought of going to them, but I probably am shying away from it because of those price points and because of the expected game flow, despite the 3-point spread, which I think is way too low. You want to run back on the Cal side. I'm completely out on Mendoza because of what they're doing with Rodgers. Can't do that. I'm also out on Ott, which is frustrating because at 7-7, I would love to use somebody that historically has performed as consistently as Ott, but he has not been consistent of late. And they had all the reason in the world to just hand off to Jaden Ott like 25 times against Miami, and they didn't do it. I don't know what the game plan was, what they were looking at, what caused them to do things that way, but it wasn't successful. And I think this game is not going to have those same opportunities. They're going to be down by too much. But hey, Ott was better in the passing game anyway. Maybe that's a reason to use him. But I think the only real play that I might want to get to is Jack Andrews, who looked pretty good against Miami. Pretty volatile play, but he generally is going to catch you 3 passes, 4 passes, that kind of thing. But put up 378 and 1 against Miami, and he's another guy down at 3,200. So, between him and our boy Vinny Anthony, you can save a ton of money on receivers, maybe pay up for a Reed and Holstein or a Milrow, whichever way you want to go with some pretty expensive guys. But nobody really excites me on the Cal side, mainly because of the way that I feel this game will go. And then same on the pit side due to the pricing and game flow.
Yeah. Yeah, this is rough. West Coast teams going east, it's going to be brutal, and especially for them. And I'm not convinced that Ott is healthy. They're trying to sell it like, oh, he's healthy now, but yeah, no burst. He did score a touchdown on the ground and through the air. So, I mean, he ended up panning out that way on the showdown slate for Miami, but there's something wrong there for sure. And the fact that they're not giving him heavy volume, I think that kind of says it all. And I like Chandler Rogers. He was, he played for North Texas last year, which anyone could play quarterback for that offense. But, he had a hell of a season. And Mendoza's had his moments. And I give all the kudos to you because I think there was a Mendoza slate last year that you absolutely railed. But I think it's time to give Rogers a shot because this offense is stuck. And they've been better than people expect.
And if they would commit to one of them, I would love to use that guy.
Right.
But I think it's going to be like 80% Mendoza, but then Rodgers comes in when they get inside the 20, which is what they did in the Miami game. And that's the most useless version of a DFS quarterback that exists. So that's a tough one.
Yeah. We hate the 2 quarterback systems, and we don't like the CFL quarterbacks coming in and scoring touchdowns behind the starters. All right, moving on. We got Cincy versus UCF. Another 3-point spread in favor of UCF, which I think there might be some opportunity there to bet the road dog. Total of 58.5. This is another one that I like the over. I think this is an extremely stackable game. For Cincy, Brennan Sorsby, he does just not get like enough talk or credit amongst the industry. He's only priced at 7.4. The game against Pitt, he kind of, for what we thought, he underwhelmed a little bit, but he had nice volume, threw 38 times, just under 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, like really just a poised effort. And we know he's got a rock solid floor of 20 to 25. He put up 41 against Texas Tech last week. That was with the multiple injuries to the running back room. Really solid performance, and even put 52 rushing yards on the ground, which is something we know he can do. He hasn't had to do it as much because they've got such a great runner at Kiner, but not having him last week forced Sorsby to run a little bit. And he had one of his ceiling performances. And I think going up against UCF, they're much easier to beat through the air, not as easy on the ground. And I think this is where Sorsby has one of those games where he flirts with possibly throwing for 400 yards. I honestly do. he's going to be leaned on heavily, and that UCF secondary is real putrid. The dual threat upside gives him that kind of interest to me as a main team quarterback. And then you look at his passing numbers: 66.3% completion rate, 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, just 1 interception. So another guy playing mistake-free football, and I just feel like the masses are kind of ignoring him because he has that reputation of not being a dual threat guy, but I think he can do so. Coach Satterfield says that Corey Kiner is good to go. Looked like a real bad injury in that last game, ended up missing the entire thing. I had a lot of Kiner that day. Wasn't great. He's only 5'7", so he's a good price to possibly go back to, but I am very leery. I don't have an official rule like some do about avoiding a guy coming back from injury in game one. It was a rib issue, which is kind of important for you to be a running back. And again, their UCF rush defense is actually fairly stout. They're not giving up a whole lot. So volume-wise, Kiner could get there, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of efficiency there. I'd rather look to Sorsby and some of his pass catching guys. Mainly Xavier Henderson, who is going to cost a little bit. We have some cheaper options that we've unearthed. So 7-1 for Henderson, I think, is certainly a doable price. And this is a guy who typically comes in with 5 to 7 catches, 100+ yards, and a touchdown. Kind of what you can expect, right? Has 31 catches, 450 yards, 4 touchdowns, 47 targets. And his target share is so much higher than everyone else. And then you have the tight end, Joe Royer, 20 catches, 263, 2 touchdowns, and 31 targets. And then nobody else comes in above about 15-ish targets. So those two guys are very concentrated. The target share is going to go to them. I do like the idea. I have a lot of triple stacks in, best ball and stuff like that in the Underdog Battle Royale. And I'm actually considering it heavily for DFS as well, having a Henderson, Royer, Sorsby lineup, because I think it could cook this week. We're seeing some increased target shares for Tony Johnson and Jamoy Mays, which only helps Henderson because if they're far too one-dimensional in the where those targets go, defenses can just bracket Henderson. So at least them emerging a little bit kind of forces the defense to be honest to a degree. But I really like the Cincy side of this game, and I think I'm probably going to be alone in that, perhaps against the masses. And I think more people will be on the UCF side, which is also not a bad idea. KJ Jefferson, we know the deal on him. Elite DFS option, dual threat. The passing here for UCF has been a little bit spotty, and he is priced at nearly $9K. We saw the absolute bottom fall out last week. They scored 13 points against a bad Florida team. Kobe Hudson, Florida kind of really showed the blueprint there. They doubled Hudson, bracketed, did all that stuff, and Jefferson just couldn't throw the ball for anything. And they also sacked him a million times. So he had negative 18 yards. So it was a real bad game, 3 fantasy points. We know his upside. He can put up 30+. We've seen him put up 40 in the past. I'm not going to be sitting here saying Cincinnati's defense is anything special by any means, but I don't know that KJ is worth the 9K this week, even though I do like this game environment. I think he's going to have to get there as a runner. But the problem is we've seen RJ Harvey 2 straight games under 80 yards, I think that they're going to give us a heavy dose of RJ Harvey, and we see him return to maybe a workload like we saw against TCU, where he had over 30 touches and he had that massive 45 fantasy point performance. I think that's the type of game that we see. Jefferson will get his running attempts as well, but I think they're just going to continue to pound Harvey. And the best way to beat the Cincinnati defense would be on the ground. They're much more susceptible there. These teams are kind of the opposite of each other. You can't throw that much on Cincy, but you can run on them, and vice versa with UCF. So Harvey in play at 9-2, a decision to be made for sure, because you probably won't get to Reed and Harvey, although it is possible you'll have to go cheaper at quarterback and not play Holstein. But a tough decision to be made there. Reed coming off the big game, perhaps getting some ownership for that reason alone. Harvey, for him, a down game is 75 yards and a touchdown, still 18 fantasy points. They're against Colorado, 77 and a touchdown, 26 fantasy points. Like, that's a down game for Harvey. So I tend to think you can only play one between Harvey and Reed. I kind of lean towards Harvey just because closer game. You had mentioned maybe Pittsburgh runs away with that one. Maybe you utilize the option of, in the second half, Reed's going to get less touches. Harvey kind of wins that out for me. So he is one of my favorite running backs for that reason alone. And he factors into the passing game. He had a really rough first half in that Florida game, and it seemed like, great, I paid 9-2 for this guy, and he's doing nothing. We got a late touchdown from him, and we also got a nice 35-yard reception, I believe, late in the fourth quarter. So definitely like Harvey. This team runs the football a lot. Losing Xavier Townsend wasn't thought to be much of a big deal, but certainly didn't help the passing game. It's already a pretty lean group. It's a very shallow receiving room. They only really have Kobe Hudson. They did get the emergence a little bit of the tight end Randy Pittman last week. He had a 6 to 7 targets each of the last 2 games, 15 in his last 3. So a decent value, I guess, is a PPR look if you can't get to Hudson. Still a little pricey at 6.5, but granted you can get there. Pittman priced at 3.3. Some people hate playing the tight ends. I'm okay with it because they generally give us a decent floor. And if you get somebody like Jatavian Sanders who, knocks it out of the park every once in a while, then you have yourself a slate winner. Not sure that Pittman's ever going to be that, but I think 3 to 5 targets, 50, 60 yards, a touchdown potentially in this game is certainly in the realm of possibilities here. Because I don't know that Jefferson's going to have a ton of success airing it out. Other options that they really need to step up, Jacoby Jones, the former Ohio transfer, and Trent Whittemore, who we've kind of been waiting on for each and every week to step up and hasn't. Neither has been consistent, certainly not viable fantasy options, just saying they're going to need them to step up in order for anyone to be successful beyond just RJ Harvey. So I love this one for a stack. The Sorsby passing stack with the Harvey run back seems pretty obvious, and it's relatively cheap on the Cincy side, so you can definitely get there. And then that big decision if you're going to play Reed or Harvey. I'm probably going to try to stuff both before I decide on what I'm doing at quarterback, but we'll see. As of now, Harvey's near the top of my list. Would you kind of feel the same there with Harvey, or are you kind of backing off after the last 2 games?
No, all Harvey all the time, man. That guy is explosive and gets volume. He's everything you want from a DFS running back. I love him.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of wishful thinking when I say, maybe he'll be lower owned. I don't think he will be lower owned, but maybe less than 30% as opposed to like 50 this time. All right, moving on. Stanford versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a 23-point favorite and a total of 45. Neither team yields much on the ground, which is what they want to do. So what's going to happen in this game? Is there any DFS goodness, and who do we like if so?
So, yeah, I like this one. Not on the Stanford side, not at all. I like everything about the Notre Dame side. I think this is if you ask Riley Leonard, every game is a Riley Leonard showcase game. But I think this one in particular is got Riley Leonard showcase game all over it. If you look back at, the quarterbacks that Stanford has faced, we saw Kyle McCord throw for 330 and 2. And also run one in. And then we saw Cade Klubnik throw for 255 and 4 and also run one in. And then we saw Kyron Drones 202 and also run one in. You're sensing a little bit of a theme here. The quarterback tends to do well against Stanford and ends up running one in on the ground. Who do we know, Walt, that likes to run the ball in from the quarterback position, whether it's a good idea or not? Riley Leonard is going to call Riley Leonard's number if he has a shot to do so whenever he wants. And so his receivers are also extremely cheap. Let's go try to find the most expensive Notre Dame receiver. Mitchell
This
Evans.
is a great DVP spot for passing game, by the way. So I was hoping that you might have some pass catchers because I don't know who we can take advantage with.
Yeah, so we're not going to trust Mitchell Evans and his high DraftKings score of 5.7 on the year. We are going to take a long look at Bo Collins, who has been very much up and down, but this is one of those matchups in which we could expect Bo Collins to be up. And we're also going to take a look at Jaden Greathouse, who hasn't really done much until the Louisville game, and he went 461 and 1 against Louisville, who is an actual defense, as opposed to Stanford, which this is the spot of spots to get things done through the air. So it is just the entire world is available for Riley Leonard to just go bonkers and do Riley Leonard things. And his receivers, we actually have enough cheap receivers in enough spots that you don't have to use two of them. But if you used both Greathouse and Collins, for example, you're at, 76 between those two. And Riley Leonard's only 8K, and you're using so little salary for that stack that you can do just about anything you want. Like I just made a lineup that had Holstein and Reed and that stack, and also isn't terrible everywhere else. And so this is one of those spots that I think will get overlooked because people are going to go, oh, well, it's 20-point spread and they're going to hand it off to the running backs, and we're going to see not a lot of volume from any one running back, and it's just going to be gross. Can't even use Jeremiah Love because Riley Leonard runs in so many touchdowns. You're right. You're not going to use Jeremiah Love in this spot because Stanford, people just don't bother running the ball on him. But Riley Leonard, once the ball's in his hands, once a passing play was called, there's a good chance he still runs it one way or another. And that is the best DFS spot possible, where you have a team that cannot stop the pass, which makes a coordinator want to pass, and that quarterback, once he has the decision-making ability to himself, chooses to run more often than not, and that team also cannot stop a quarterback running. Yes, I am all about Riley Leonard right now. So whether you go super aggressive, pairing him up with multiple pass catchers like I might, or whether you pair him with only a single pass catcher, which is what people will probably do if using him, or if you use him just all on his own, which is a fine way to play this slate too. I want a lot of Riley Leonard exposure on this one, and I want nothing to do with the Stanford side coming back. So lots of Notre Dame points, lots of 3-and-outs, long punts, lots of long field for Riley Leonard to do damage. Give me all of the Riley Leonard overs on his PrizePicks and Underdog and props and all that. It's going to be a statement game. Get Notre Dame vaulted securely into the playoff. Get Riley Leonard back into the conversation for some season-end awards. Do all of the damage through one player, and it's a great spot for him.
Yeah, I have a rule. I try not to play anyone against Notre Dame, so definitely an easy fade there. And yet, like I said, the passing game, man, they just give up so much, and I'm nervous about the Notre Dame pass catchers, but I do like the Riley Leonard call. Might be tempted more to just use him naked and hope for the best, but I think I'd be on Bo Collins, if anyone who you mentioned. So love it. All right, moving on. Louisville versus Virginia, total of 54. Louisville 7-point favorite, and yet another game kind of in that mid-50s that I feel pretty positive about the over. We saw Louisville with a bit of a letdown last week in a way, not for Ja'Cory Brooks, but they definitely had their struggles overall, but there was some fantasy goodness there. I think this one goes over. That's kind of sneaky. Tyler Shuck did have a nice game there, 329 yards, 2 touchdowns. So SMU, defensively, we know they're terrible. He's attempted 33 plus passes in 3 of his last 4 games. And I think that the dual threat part of Shuck might be gone now. He hasn't quite unlocked that yet, but he suffered so many season-ending injuries at the latter half of his career that I'm not sure we're going to see that explosive running game from him. But the passing volume is certainly going to be there, and this is a good spot to do it. As Virginia, their defense is putrid. They're another one of those teams that's okay against the run, but they're so bad against the pass that teams just tend to pass on them, and that's going to be a spot for Shuck to possibly throw for 300 plus again. Mo Turner was out last week at the running back spot. Isaac Brown operated as the RB1, and he did quite well, racked up 117 yards, 5 catches for 44 yards. He's only 4.3. He's super active as a pass catcher and has been even when Turner plays. So even if Turner's back, I think we still see Brown kind of, carve out this, at worst 1A spot in the running backs room. And as a pass catcher, he's extremely valuable in that DK PPR pricing. So I do like Brown at 4.3 more than I thought I ever would. I wasn't planning to really ever use a Louisville running back this year. but Brown, after the last couple of weeks, definitely has my attention. Ja'Cory Brooks at the receiver spot, he's been absolutely outstanding. He's priced at 6'7", so you're not going to get him very cheap. And the volume may not necessarily always be there. He's good for 6 to 7 targets, but a total game breaker. Only 3 receptions last week, but he got 2 touchdowns on those 3 receptions and 121 yards. It's the second straight game that he's had multiple touchdowns. He has 4 touchdowns in the past 2 games alone. Brings his season total up to 25 catches, 489 yards, 6 touchdowns, and on 35 targets. Great play there. You can use him with Shuck or on his own. If you're, it looks like the lineup's going to shake out to probably being able to pay up for semi-pay up, I should say, for one receiver. Brooks is a good one to do that, but I'm thinking I want to go back to Colin Lacey. Priced at only 3.9, up from 3.4. He was mega chalk as we expected. He had 9 targets in his first game there against Notre Dame. He did have 4 to 5 targets last week, but he only caught 2 passes and 1 touchdown. They did give him 2 carries for 10 yards. Shows they want to give him the ball. He's a playmaker, but Brooks just absolutely buried SMU with those long touchdowns, and that kind of hurt Lacey in that regard. Now, I don't expect him to be 40+% owned like he was last week. People are fickle in this industry. We know that. There's going to be much less. He may still reach to 15 to 20% if other sites are kind of hyping him up, but there's really no reason not to, just because he had the bad game. The targets were still there. He's still priced too cheap. We know how good he is from his days at South Alabama. And he's in an arguably a better matchup this week than he was last week. And last week was pretty damn good, no doubt. But this week against Virginia, he can take the top off of him. I think Brooks will probably have another long touchdown, but I do look for Lacey to bounce back here, and he's very cheap at 3.9. We need value. We want value pieces that aren't very popular. If you're not comfortable taking a Notre Dame receiver, I wouldn't blame you one bit. Colin Lacey at 3.9 just makes way too much sense. Chris Bell's target shares have gone in the toilet since Lacey's gotten activated, so I think we can probably safely look away from Bell, and this becomes kind of a 2-horse race between Brooks and Lacey, but I think we see a major bounce-back week from Lacey. And again, one of those, DFS things, fantasy things, where maybe there's no scientific reason or logical reason for the numbers, guys, but there's so many times where a chalk player bricks so hard the week before and nobody uses him the week after, and he goes completely ballistic. This sets up for a very big spot for Lacey. So he will be a guy that I'm back on. It's pretty nonsensical not to, and you're going to see half the ownership on him, if that. On the Virginia side, I certainly like Anthony Andrea. I'm one of the only guys I think that do. He was too expensive at 9.2. We knew that. Now he's priced down at 7.9. You're going to have a lot of people telling you, well, nobody can really run on Louisville and dual threats. What's he going to actually do against them? But you really have to kind of look at it and actually look at the games. And they've been struggling against dual threats actually on a pretty regular basis. And we saw Riley Leonard have a nice game of them most recently with a 50-yard and a score on the ground. There is a lot of variance when it comes to Colandrea, but he is a very high upside player capable of putting 30 to 40 on the board, but also has that floor of sub 10. It can get really nasty. Rushed for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns this season, thrown for over 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns. He is not playing mistake-free football like some of the other options. He does have 4 interceptions, and he makes throws into double and triple coverage sometimes, but I really like him in this game. Probably more of a GPP look. I don't know that I could really stomach using him as a main team option, but it would not surprise me one bit if he ended up being a top 3 scorer at the position. As far as the running game goes, yes, Louisville is good against actual running backs. It's just those mobile quarterbacks that they have trouble with. Kobe Pace has been kind of relegated to a 1A at best. We're seeing a lot more Xavier Brown, who is there at 3.2. We're not going to unleash him this week, but remember that name, Xavier Brown. There's going to be a game coming up where we're going to be able to use him. At receiver, Malachi Fields, he's priced reasonably at 7.5. This is another team, much like Oklahoma, that has just been decimated by injuries in the receiver room. Trell Harris once again popping up on the report after returning. Chris Tyree appears to be out, and then Sudarian Harrison has missed the last 2 games. So the relevant options, again, Malachi Fields, who's the top option on the team, 42 targets, 28 catches, 412 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He goes as Colandrea goes. When he is extremely inaccurate, it makes it hard for Fields to do much of anything. But when Calandrea is kind of feeling himself a little bit, and he just kind of throws it in the vicinity of Fields, he usually is able to go and get it. We saw that in the Wake Forest game. He struggled a bit recently, but he's scoring touchdowns. Definitely a good option in this one at 7.5. I expect a lot of volume. And then you can look at some cheaper options. The tight end, Tyler Neville, 12 catches for 197 yards, 2 touchdowns, 18 targets. He's pretty much option number 2 in the passing game at this point, and he's relatively consistent and a 3.5 price point, so you can use him as a value option if you want. And then you have J.R. Wilson, who made his debut last week, missed the beginning of the season with an injury, caught all 4 of his targets for 44 yards. He is going to have to slide into that WR2 role with Tyree out and most likely going to be a highly limited Trell Harris. So if you want to use a super sneak, that's going to be the name I give people there, 20 minutes before lock. What's the 3K guy that you can use? Probably going to throw the name J.R. Wilson at you, somebody who I think can get 10-plus fantasy points in this matchup simply because he's one of the last men standing in the receiver room. Stackable game. ACC games are stackable this week for sure. I like a lot of the Louisville side and some of the Virginia side in GPP-wise, but the big takeaway, Colin Lacey bounce back week at half the ownership. I'm all in there. You feeling some Colin Lacey this week, or are you going to be off of him now?
No, I love the call, man. That seems to be the way that it goes, and like you said, it's not to take away from Brooks. I think Brooks gets his too, but the price point on Lacey and the reduction in ownership due to the bust, I think it's too good of a spot to pass up.
Yeah, it just sets up almost exactly the same. It's just funny how that works. All right, Penn State versus USC, total of 51. Penn State 4.5-point favorites. You have been just ridiculously good on predicting USC game scripts. It's your team. Go figure. Break it down for us.
Yeah, man. So it has been tough sledding for the USC. First run of the Big Ten gauntlet. Is there a more physical? Well, I guess you could get Iowa in there too, but Michigan and then Wisconsin and then Minnesota. These guys need a break. These guys need, to chug some Gatorade and get a bye week, and instead they get Penn State, and that's probably the most physical team outside of Ohio State in the Big Ten. And so, it's going to be another tough one for the Trojans. It's what a 4-point spread. Trojans are home dogs. You don't see that a lot with them, but I think it makes sense here. I don't think Penn State runs away with this one by any means, but I think it is a tough physical game, especially if they do truly have Singleton back. I know we got a little bit juked on that one with, hey, Singleton's going to be in the game, except he's not going to play in the game, and it's just going to be Allen all the time. That was a weird move for them to do. It's Hinckley Ropati revisited, right? I guess something about teams that wear blue and white and being a little sketchy with their running backs. But yeah, Katron Allen would have been smash play at 6K if we were getting 25 Katron Allen touches. I don't think we're going to get that. Have some interest in Singleton, and USC is so worn down at this point, and that plays into the explosive nature of his game, coming off of his own personal bye, not playing last week against UCLA, and I think part of that was Penn State going, well, we don't really need him for this one, so we can probably let him get fully healed up for a game in which we will need him. And I think that's playing into my interest in him, is that they were probably a little bit kind of saving him for this one. And the difference in line play is massive. This is probably the most dominant offensive line in the Big Ten, and it's going up against a severely overmatched USC defense, which should open up some holes for Singleton, and we know how explosive he can be. Now, he's not going to get 30 touches like a Monangai would, or like a Des Reed, like we've seen him do between, pass game and run game. He's still probably only going to be limited to like that 15 to 18 touch range, but he could break 2 of those for 60-yard touchdowns and get there on those runs alone. And I think that given the split, given that he's coming off of an injury, given that, this is not a game I think a bunch of people are going to be falling all over themselves to target, I think he's going to be very low owned. And this feels a little bit like what I like to call a Jerome Ford spot, where he's at an uncomfortable enough price point that, there's no real good reason to roster him. But there's a lot of explosiveness to his game, and there's opportunity to exploit that explosiveness going up against a physically beaten down defense that wasn't very good to begin with. This is an amazing spot for him. So I do like Singleton a lot. I don't think I've played Drew Aller once since there started being Drew Aller slates, so I don't know that I'm going to be using him here. I played Tyler Warren last week in one of my best lineups, and I wish that he would have been able to be more involved throughout the game, because he started pretty hot, and he was involved in the offense until they realized they didn't have to throw anymore. They probably are going to have to throw a little bit more in this one. So I think you can potentially get to either Tyler Warren or Harrison Wallace, or even a Julian Fleming. I think all of them have the potential to be pretty explosive in this one because of the lack of defense that we're going to see from USC, and just their lack of desire to tackle and get physical, because they've been doing it outside of their comfort zone for so long. So any of those pieces are fine, but really my main interest lies in Singleton, who I think is going to have an amazing game. And then it's not a USC game if I don't give a passing mention to Zachariah Branch, but he's been pretty shut down outside of the Michigan game. Hasn't been able to get loose and do much, and it's really been Jacoby Lane who has had the explosive plays, but even he struggled, as most of the team did, against Minnesota. And I think that we see more of that here. I think it's going to be a tough one for SC. Cheap receiver, your guy Deuce Robinson, down there at 3,300. I think we could make a lineup of 3 receivers, 3,300 and under, that's actually kind of comfortable, which is crazy. So if there's a guy from the USC side that I like, it's probably Deuce. They seem to be wanting to get him more involved as conference play has begun. And so that's an interesting run back if you have a Singleton lineup, or even to throw in as a flyer in your other cheap lineup. So, between Deuce Robinson, Colin Lacey, Bo Collins, Jaden Greathouse, we got some cheap receivers to use, man. It's just all about how it fits. But I do very much like Singleton in this one.
Yeah, I love the Singleton call. The DBP's clearly like USC giving up a ton of yardage on the ground. I zagged a little bit. It was pretty I telegraphed it on the Saturday show, like exactly what I thought would happen. Singleton's going to dress, but they won't need him. And so I put about half my lineups to Katron Allen and didn't get paid off for it. I mean, he had 21 carries, but only 78 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, a pretty big letdown for what I would have expected there. I think that was the right move there for me, but he's just not explosive like Singleton, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. He's going to be able to bust like a 40-plus yard rush, maybe multiple in this game. And that price point of $7K, yeah, it's a little bit tough, but I feel like, at this point of the season, I want to attack DVP spots that are prevalently and obvious to me, and this is one of them. So 100%. And as far as Deuce Robinson goes, I was thinking about him the other day, like taking him out and putting him on like Northern Illinois or something, and he would just be like a 10K monster. Anyways, let's move on to this last game here, Arizona versus BYU. Looking forward to some max slates, by the way, Bowling Green especially. Harold Fannin, if you guys haven't heard of him yet, just wait.
Oh yeah.
He is awesome. All right, BYU 3.5-point favorites versus Arizona, total of 48.5. And you talked about Hinckley Rapati. Well, we might have a situation here. As we'll start with BYU, the running back room. LJ Martin priced at 4-1, dealing with that ankle issue, has had a great week of practice. I don't think you can use him in your primary build. If you got balls of steel, I mean, you can go for it and hope, but I think he's probably reserved for a GPP alt lineup. This is a spot where they really need him, but I wanted them to kind of just bring him along slowly because BYU's next game is against Oklahoma State, and I'd much rather unleash LJ Martin against them than Arizona and giving him a kind of week. So with Martin, it's like, give him 5 to 10 look carries, maybe have him be just okay enough to get his price up to like 5K so that in the next game against Oklahoma State, we can go all in without the entire industry following. But yeah, it's BYU's running back room is a mess. They really like the Moa kid. He's, Sione Moe. So he's probably still going to get looks, but he's been banged up because he's dealing with the foot issue too. So tons of injuries. At the end of the day, when LJ Martin is fully healthy, he's going to just take control of this entire backfield. He's their everything. Going into the season, he was expected to kind of carry this offense, and he certainly would have. Saw in the first game in a non-competitive game against a non-FBS team, he was absolutely just wrecking shop, and he's really talented. But I don't know if we can use him in our main. Maybe that's just too much trauma from the Rapati incident from a couple of weeks ago, but I'm certainly being careful. I do really like Jake Retzlaff as a GPP option. I kind of feel that way every single week, and I tend to only use him on the short slates because it's kind of difficult to get there in the main. But he's been good, and he's using his mobility, which is something that a lot of people I don't think realized he had. He's up to 156 rushing yards, has scored a touchdown, also been pretty accurate, 61% as a passer, over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns. He does have 5 interceptions because he takes some chances that maybe he shouldn't. That Baylor game where it got a little bit closer than it should have. It was a road game, and we loved that. That was a BYU -3. That was a big bet for us that we won. But he got picked off a couple of times there, just kind of making some dumb throws. But I really like Retzlaff in this game. I think he can do some damage against Arizona. And then receiver-wise, cheap options as well. They're not quite to the sub 4K level, excuse me, but you do have 2 sub 5K guys. Chase Roberts, who has been really, really good. 28 targets this year, 21 catches, 336 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kind of the possession guy, more of the PPR look. And then down there at 4.2, you have the emergence of former MAC player Darius Lassiter, who dealt with a myriad of injuries himself early in the season. And each week you've seen him catch a longer pass. And then he broke out against Baylor, 8 receptions, 120 catches, and a touchdown. It's his 3rd straight game with a score. Retzlaff clearly likes him a lot. 4.2, depending on your build there, if you can get a little bit higher than those, sub 4K guys for one of your spots, I think Lassiter is actually a really nice look. We've seen Arizona involved in some games where their secondary has gotten beaten up on a little bit. And they're just really peppering Lassiter with a lot of targets. Despite playing one less game than everyone else, he has the team lead for targets at 32, 16 catches for 235 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think Lassiter and Roberts are your 2 ways to kind of get involved in this game, not together, but one or the other, and then some GPP looks for Jake Retzlaff. On the Arizona side, I am a believer in this BYU defense. At this point, not enough people are kind of recognizing that, hey, this BYU team, they're the real deal defensively. Their opponents are averaging less than 16 points per game. They're surrendering less than 180 passing yards per game and only 121.6 rushing yards per game. And they're doing it against teams that, you can look at and say, who have they really played? Like Baylor, okay, whatever. Baylor's got a decent offense, but I'll give you that. K-State, they held K-State, a very good K-State offense, to 9 points. They made Avery Johnson look like a JV player. SMU offense, we saw them drop, 70 points in a game this year. They held them to 15. Wyoming, I'll give you that, 14 points against them on the road. Wyoming is Wyoming. In the Baylor game, if you don't want to give me that one, that's fine. But K-State and SMU, those 2 defensive performances, I watched both those games, were very, very impressive. And as good as Arizona's looked on offense, I don't think that they're any better than those two offenses enough to where they can take advantage of this BYU team, especially on the road. So that kind of takes me off of Noah Fifita, who is only 6'5". He's only had that really like that New Mexico game week 1 with T-Mac going nuts. It was like, oh my God, I had taken a future out on Noah early in the summertime, a throwaway ticket that I knew he wasn't going to win Heisman, but he had great odds. And I was like, holy shit, this guy might actually win the Heisman. No, he's not going to win the Heisman. He's been throwing lots of volume, 49 attempts last week, 31 against Utah, 42 against K-State. But the problem is he has been under 20 fantasy points in every single game since that New Mexico game. Not a lot of mobility there, and the accuracy has been a major issue, but also the touchdowns haven't been there. He is not throwing a tremendous amount of touchdowns, and that's hurting him a lot. Running defense has been even better, so I don't expect a lot. We love Quali Conley. We had so many dates with Conley on the Rachel slates, if you will, during his time at San Jose State. He's had some pretty nice production here for Arizona. Only one game over 100 yards, but he's highly active in the receiving game. That's where he's going to have to be, to be, I guess, paying off a 7-1 price tag. He's going to have to catch a lot of balls in this one. I think that we have highlighted enough plays in that range at running back that are in much better spots. I don't think we need to get too cute there with Quali, even though we do like him. Got to separate our brand favorite there from the actual matchup. And then when it comes to Arizona slates, you got to ask, Tet McMillan, T-Mac, whatever you want to call him, 8.5. It's too steep for me. It was even too steep in the Texas Tech game, which I believe, what was that, like a secondary slate? He ended up with 26 at 9K. You didn't necessarily have to have him depending on the rest of your build, but he's just such a high price for a receiver. I don't see him putting up 67 here like he did against New Mexico. And even 20 to 25 at this price, if you fade, I think you're okay. So that's going to be the case there for me. I'm going to be fading him as well, and that could be a dangerous fade. But again, I believe in this BYU defense. They know where the offensive production is going to come from. They'll be able to contain T-Mac to a degree, or at least they're going to plan for it. If you want an option from here, I think a tight end, which I'm always harping on tight ends, Keon Burnett. His price has come up a little bit due to his increased production at 4.5, but he's seen a very big increase in targets as well and consistency. 10 catches over his last 2 games, over 100 yards and a touchdown. Not my favorite play by any means, but he's there if you want some Arizona exposure, or if you believe in T-Mac and think that he's going to do damage against BYU, by all means, use him, but that's just a price point that I'm not going to get to there. BYU mini stack as the hammer play for all the marbles there, I think. All right, so that is the slate. Before we get into cores, we're going to talk about some underdogs, prize picks, any betting opportunities. I have 2 that I want to bring up, and then I'll kick it over to you. Jalen Jackson, and you had mentioned some Iowa State on the next slate. And we're Abu Sama guys after that snow game last year. Don't get it twisted. I got him in best ball too, but I gotta give it up to Jalen Jackson. He runs so much better, so much tougher, more elusive than Abu Sama. His rushing prop over on PrizePicks is 47.5. I bet his 70 plus on DraftKings. Love that prop over 47.5 rushing yards. I think that at this point, even in a shared backfield, he's a home run hitter. Anything under 50, you're just going to slam the over. And then Caleb Johnson over 106.5 rushing yards. That one seems relatively obvious to me. I look for him to get 125 plus with ease. What are some of the prize picks and or underdog plays that you've got today, my good sir?
Okay, so I'm not going to do it, but every week from here on out, it's going to be what is Ashton Johnson's rushing prop, and he's playing Hawaii, so like this is not a difficult matchup, but 183.5 is and that's even higher than last week, and so like the danger is he's only going to play the first half, so you have to get it done early, and he does. He definitely doesn't waste any time. But you're not going to have 4 quarters for him to do it, most likely. But it's just interesting, man, to see a prop come out at like almost 200 yards rushing. That's like, I don't think we've ever seen that before. It's fascinating. So let's get into who we might use. Jackson at 47.5 is a massive slam. I think in terms of other guys, kind of from the main slate, I like Jamal Haynes over 70.5 rushing yards for a rushing plus receiving yards. We'll just see if my guy's on there. He's not on there yet. He might show up. But I want to get to some Riley Leonard props one way or another. They don't have the ones that I would want to use. In fact, I don't think they have any. There we go. Riley Leonard rushing yards, 63.5. We'll take that. His fantasy score is the one that I really want to get to. And that's not up yet. They don't have any of the fantasy scores up yet, but I do want to get to that one. And then I also want to get to Will Howard. We're going to take a rare under on Will Howard pass yards. We'll get into the thesis of that on my article for the late slate. So read that article. But it is going to be a lot of Quinshon Judkins and Dragon Henderson, mainly Judkins for Ohio State. Probably not going to see them air it out all that much. So I do like under 246.5 for Will Howard passing yards.
Dig it. All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued to hear that about Howard. All right. I have some betting plays here. We already mentioned Pitt -3. We both like Texas -14. Every once in a while, there'll just be like a total or a line where we're both kind of like, huh? The Texas one, I know it's the rivalry, but I just don't know how they don't win that by more than 2 touchdowns. Also have from the featured play, San Jose State -1.5 against Colorado State. Nicky Nash action for us. I feel like they win that one pretty handily. And then Hawaii versus Boise. You'd mentioned about Genty, how good that is. The total right now is sitting at 59.5. I think Boise puts up like 40, which is what they normally do, right? 40 to 50. So we only need about 20 from Hawaii, which I think they can certainly do with their passing offense. I'm taking the over 59.5 there. And then props wise, I had mentioned Jackson. I took his 70+ rushing yards on DraftKings because I don't know. I feel like he's going to go nuts. And then you had mentioned Riley Leonard props. They don't have, I think they have a passing prop for him on DK. I'm waiting for his touchdown prop because you had mentioned him doing a lot. Like when I first saw this, I thought, man, I need to take 2+ touchdowns for Riley Leonard. They're not offering it yet, but I'm looking for a book that does because I think he does score multiple touchdowns on the ground this week. So 100% agree with you on that. That takes us to cores, DFS cores. Then we'll get our slate breaker and touchdown calls and all that. So what is the core you're looking at right now? And if you want to mix it up, it doesn't have to be quarterback, running back, receiver. It can be 2 of one position if you want, but however you want to do it, let's hear it.
So I think I am going to stick with the normal format. We'll go with Riley Leonard at quarterback. We'll go with Nick Singleton at running back, and we're going to go with Xavier Henderson at wide receiver.
Love it. Henderson is that dude. I'm going to have a big decision to make. Right now, I'll say Haynes King as my core quarterback, but I'm really going back and forth between Leonard and King and going back to the 4. I'm going to try to go back to 4 running back lineup. And then my RJ Harvey core play number 2 there at the running back spot. And then looking at the rare quarterback running back pairing, which works a lot more than you think, Holstein and Reed. I'm going to go with not only Haynes King, but also Jamal Haynes. Double running back core here. Georgia Tech, mini stack. Give me some passes, but I think both of them are going to hammer it out. Feeling pretty good about that. All right. That brings us to the slate breaker section of the show. And I know Jake's going to bring the heat on this one, and we're going to get back in the W column here. Revisit some of that mojo from that sick-o Ty Felton call that people are still talking about to this day. Who is your slate breaker for week 7?
We're going to go, probably no surprise, once again, we're going to go Riley Leonard with 404, 2 of which will be of the rushing variety.
Riley Leonard, slate breaking performance. Let's go. I like this touchdown call here on Nick Singleton. I'm going to go with this 2+ touchdowns at plus 475. Missed the days of being able to get an anytime touchdown at that by itself, but I'm riding with you on the Singleton call there. Running backs versus USC, the nuts. All right, that is the end of the show. We're getting so efficient, my goodness. Throw that 12 gamer aside. Lots going on this weekend. We have the 3-game slate tomorrow that we'll be, of course, talking about in the Discord. There will be some content there, and then probably a Google Doc. And then, of course, the article is dropping, full slate breakdown for the main slate, as well as the prop betting piece Jake will have on Saturday afternoon, or late morning, I should say, for the night slate. We'll also have Discord coverage of every slate in between, and back on the YouTube channel Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock, 8 a.m. PST, answering any and all questions you have, FanDuel takes, betting takes, anything and everything that you need. We'll be there to help you. Week 7, locked in, dialed in, feel great. Lots of window trips and green screens ahead. Appreciate all you guys' continued support. We'll see you next week on the CFB Show.